This is the Martian Chronicles. January 2030. Rocket summer. 1 minute it was Ohio winter, with doors closed, windows locked, panes blind with frost, icicles fringing every roof, children skiing on slopes, housewives lumbering like great black bears in their furs along the icy streets. Then a long wave of warmth across the small town. A flooding sea of hot air. It seemed as if someone had left a bakery door open. The heat pulsed among the cottages and bushes and children. The icicles dropped, shattering to melt. The doors flew open. The windows flew up. The children worked off their wool clothes. Housewives shed their bear disguises. The snow dissolved and showed last summer's ancient green lawns. Rocket summer. The words passed among the people in the open airing houses. Rocket summer. The warm desert air changing the frost patterns on the windows, erasing the artwork. The skis and sled suddenly useless. The snow, fallen from the cold sky upon the town, turned to a hot rain before it touched the ground. Rocket summer. People leaned from their dripping porches and watched the reddening sky. The rocket lay on the launching pad, blowing out pink clouds of fire and oven heat. The rocket stood in the cold winter morning, making summer with every breath of its mighty exhaust. The rocket made climates, and summer lay for a brief moment upon the land. February 2030. Ela. They had a house of crystal pillars on the planet Mars by the edge of an empty sea. Every morning you could see Mrs. K eating the golden fruits that grew from the crystal walls, cleaning the house with handfuls of magnetic dust, which, taking all dirt with it, blew away on the hot wind. Afternoons, when the fossil sea was warm and motionless, the wine trees stood stiff in the yard, a little distant Martian bone town was all enclosed and no one drifted out their doors. You could see Mr. K himself in his room, reading from a metal book with raised hieroglyphs over which he brushed his hand as one might play a harp. And from the book, as his fingers stroked, a voice sang, a soft ancient voice, which told tales of when the sea was red steam on the shore. Ancient men had carried clouds of metal insects and electric spiders into battle. Mr. and Mrs. K had lived by the Dead Sea for 20 years, and their ancestors had lived in the same house, which turned and followed the sun flower-like for 10 centuries. Mr. and Mrs. K were not old. They had the fair, brownish skin of the true Martian, the yellow coin eyes, the soft, musical voices. Once they had liked painting pictures with chemical fire, swimming in the canals in the seasons when the wine trees filled them with green liquors, and talking into the dawn together by the blue phosphorescent portraits in the speaking room. They were not happy now. This morning Mrs. K stood between the pillars, listening to the desert sand's heat melt into yellow wax, seemingly run on the horizon. Something was going to happen. She waited. She watched the blue sky of Mars as if it might at any moment grip in on itself, contract, expel a shining miracle down upon the sand. Nothing happened. Tired of waiting, she walked through the misting pillars. A gentle rain sprang from the fluted pillar tops, cooling the scorched air, falling gently on her. On hot days it was like walking in a creek. The floors of the house glittered with cool streams. In the distance she heard her husband playing his book steadily, his fingers never tired of the old songs. Quietly she wished he might one day again spend as much time holding and touching her like a little harp as he did his incredible books. But no. She shook her head. An imperceptible, forgiving shrug. Her eyelids closed softly down upon her golden eyes. Marriage made people old and familiar while still young. She lay back in a chair that moved to take her shape even as she moved. She closed her eyes tightly and nervously. The dream occurred. Her brown fingers trembled, came up, grasped at the air. A moment later she sat up, startled, gasping. She glanced about swiftly, as if expecting someone there before her. She seemed disappointed. The space between the pillars was empty. Her husband appeared in a triangular door. "Did you call?" he asked. "No," she cried. "I thought I heard you cry out." "Did I? I was almost asleep and had a dream." "In the daytime? You don't often do that." She sat as if struck in the face by the dream. "How strange. How very strange," she murmured. "The dream." "Oh?" He evidently wished to return to his book. "I dreamed about a man. A tall man, 6 feet 1 inch tall. How absurd. A giant, a misshapen giant. Somehow, she tried the words, he looked all right, in spite of being tall. And he had, oh, I know you'll think it's silly, he had blue eyes. Blue eyes? Gods, cried Mr. K. What do you dream next? I suppose he had black hair. How did you guess? She was excited. I picked the most unlikely color, he replied coldly. Well, black it was. He had a very, very white skin. It was most unusual. He was dressed in a strange uniform, and he came down out of the sky and spoke pleasantly to me. She smiled. Out of the sky? What nonsense. He came in a metal thing that glittered in the sun, she remembered. She closed her eyes to shape it again. I dreamed there was the sky. Something sparkled like a coin thrown into the air. Suddenly it grew large and fell down softly to land. A long silver craft, round and alien. And a door opened in the side of the silver object, and this tall man stepped out. If you worked harder, you wouldn't have these silly dreams. I rather enjoyed it, she replied, lying back. I never suspected myself of such an imagination. Black hair, blue eyes, and white skin. What a strange man, and yet quite handsome. Wishful thinking. You're unkind. I didn't think him up on purpose. He came into my mind while I drowsed. It wasn't like a dream. It was so unexpected and different. He looked at me and he said, I've come from the 3rd planet in my ship. My name is Nathaniel York. A stupid name. It's no name at all, objected the husband. Of course it's stupid because it's a dream, she explained softly. And he said, this is the first trip across space. There are only 2 of us in our ship, myself and my friend Bert. Another stupid name. And he said, we're from a city on Earth. That's the name of our planet, continued Mrs. K. That's what he said. Earth was the name he spoke. And he used another language. Somehow I understood him with my mind. Telepathy, I suppose. Mr. K turned away. She stopped him with a word. Eel, she called quietly. Do you ever wonder if there are people living on the 3rd planet? The 3rd planet is incapable of supporting life, stated the husband patiently. Our scientists have said there's far too much oxygen in that atmosphere. But wouldn't it be fascinating if there were people? And they travel through space in some sort of ship? Really, Ela, you know how I hate this emotional wailing. Let's get on with our work. It was late in the day when she began singing the song as she moved among the whispering pillars of rain. She sang it over and over again. What's that song? Snapped her husband at last, walking in to sit at the fire table. I don't know. She looked up, surprised at herself. She put her hand to her mouth, unbelieving. The sun was setting. The house was closing itself in like a giant flower with the passing of light. Wind blew among the pillars. The fire table bubbled its fierce pool of silver lava. The wind stirred her russet hair, crooning softly in her ears. She stood silently looking out into the great sallow distances of sea bottom as if recalling something, her yellow eyes soft and moist. Drink to me only with thine eyes. I will pledge with mine, she sang softly, quietly, slowly. Or leave a kiss within the cup. I'll not ask for wine. She hummed now, moving her hands in the wind ever so slightly, her eyes shut. She finished the song. It was very beautiful. Never heard that song before. Did you compose it? He inquired, his eyes sharp. No. Yes. No, I don't know, really. She hesitated wildly. I don't even know what the words are. They're another language. What language? She dropped portions of meat numbly into the simmering lava. I don't know. She drew the meat forth a moment later, cooked, served on a plate for him. It's just a crazy thing I made up, I guess. I don't know why. He said nothing. He watched her drown meats in the hissing fire pool. The sun was gone. Slowly, the night came in to fill the room, swallowing the pillars, and both of them like a dark wine poured to the ceiling. Only the silver lava's glow lit their faces. She hummed the strange song again. Instantly he leaped from his chair and stalked angrily from the room. Later, in isolation, he finished supper. When he arose, he stretched, glanced at her, and suggested, yawning, Let's take the Flamebirds to town tonight to see an entertainment. You don't mean it, she said. Are you feeling well? What's so strange about that? We haven't gone for an entertainment in 6 months. I think it's a good idea. Suddenly you're so solicitous, she said. Don't talk that way, he replied. Do you or do you not want to go? She looked out at the pale desert. Twin white moons were rising. Cool water ran softly about her toes. She began to tremble just the least bit. She wanted very much to sit quietly here, soundless, not moving until this thing occurred, this thing expected all day, this thing that could not occur but might. A drift of song brushed through her mind. Do you good, he urged. Come along now. I'm tired, she said. Some other night. Here's your scarf. We haven't gone anywhere in months. Except you. Twice a week to Zai City. She wouldn't look at him. Business, he said. Oh, she whispered to herself. In the phial, a liquid poured, turned to blue mist, settled about her neck, quivering. The flame birds waited, like a bed of coals, glowing on the cool, smooth sands. The white canopy ballooned on the night wind, flapping softly, tied by 1,000 green ribbons to the birds. Ela laid herself back on the canopy, and at a word from her husband, the birds leaped, burning toward the dark sky. The ribbons tautened. The canopy lifted. The sand slid whining under. The blue hills drifted by, leaving their home behind, the raining pillars, the caged flowers, the singing brooks, the whispering floor creaks. She did not look at her husband. She heard him crying out to the birds as they rose higher, like 10,000 hot sparkles, so many red-yellow fireworks in the heavens, tugging the canopy like a flower petal burning through the wind. She didn't watch the dead, ancient bone-chest cities slide under, or the old canals filled with emptiness and dreams. Past dry rivers and dry lakes they flew, like a shadow of the moon, like a torch burning. She watched only the sky. The husband spoke. She watched the sky. Did you hear what I said? What? He exhaled. You might pay attention. I was thinking. I never thought you were a nature lover. You're certainly interested in the sky tonight, he said. It's very beautiful. I was figuring, said the husband slowly. I thought I'd call Hull tonight. I'd like to talk to him about us spending some time, a week or so, in the Blue Mountains. It's just an idea. The Blue Mountains? She held to the canopy rim with one hand, turning swiftly toward him. Oh, it's just a suggestion. When do you want to go? She asked, trembling. Thought we might leave tomorrow morning. You know, early start and all that, he said. We never go this early in the year. Just this once, I thought, he smiled. It was good to get away. Yeah, some peace and quiet, you know. Haven't anything else planned. We'll go, won't we? She took a breath, waited, and then replied, No. What? His cry startled the birds. The canopy jerked. No, she said. It's settled. I won't go. He looked at her. They did not speak after that. She turned away. The birds flew on, 10,000 firebrands down the wind. In the dawn, the sun through the crystal pillars melted the fog that supported Ela as she slept. All night she had hung above the floor, buoyed by the soft carpeting of mist that poured from the walls when she lay down to rest. All night she'd slept on this silent river like a boat upon a soundless tide. Now the fog burned away. The mist level lowered until she was deposited upon the shore of awakening. She opened her eyes. Her husband stood over her. He looked as if he had stood there for hours, watching. She did not know why, but she could not look him in the face. You've been dreaming again, he said. You spoke out and kept me awake. I really think you should see a doctor. I'll be all right. You talked a lot in your sleep. Did I? She started up. Dawn was cold in the room. A gray light filled her as she lay there. What was your dream? She had to think a moment to remember. The ship. It came from the sky again, landed. The tall man stepped out and talked with me, telling me little jokes, laughing, and it was pleasant. Mr. K touched a pillar. Fountains of warm water leaped up, steaming. The chill vanished from the room. Mr. K's face was impassive. And then, she said, this man, who said his strange name was Nathaniel York, told me I was beautiful, and he kissed me. Ha! Cried the husband, turning violently away, his jaw working. It's only a dream, she was amused. Keep your silly feminine dreams to yourself. You're acting like a child. She lapsed back upon the few remaining remnants of chemical mist. After a moment, she laughed softly. I thought it's more of the dream, she confessed. Well, what is it? What is it? He shouted. You're so bad-tempered. Tell me, he demanded. You can't keep secrets from me. His face was dark and rigid as he stood over her. I've never seen you this way, she replied, half shocked, half entertained. All that happened was this Nathaniel York person told me, he told me that he'd take me away in his ship, into the sky with him, take me back to his planet with him. It's really quite ridiculous. Ridiculous, is it? He almost screamed. You should have heard yourself, fawning on him, talking to him, singing with him. God, all night. Should have heard yourself. Eel. When's he landing? Where's he coming down with his goddamn ship? Eel, lower your voice. Voice be damned. He bent stiffly over her. And in this dream, he seized her wrist, didn't the ship land over in Green Valley? Didn't it? Answer me. What? Yes. It landed this afternoon, didn't it? He kept at her. Yes. Yes, I think so, yes, but only in a dream. Well, he flung her hand away stiffly. It's good you're truthful. I heard every word you said in your sleep. You mentioned the valley and the time. Breathing hard, he walked between the pillars like a man blinded by a lightning bolt. Slowly his breath returned. She watched him as if he were quite insane. She rose finally and went to him. Eel, she whispered. I'm all right. You're sick. No. He forced a tired smile. Just childish. Forgive me, darling. He gave her a rough pat. Too much work lately. I'm sorry. Think I'll lie down a while. You were so excited. I'm all right now. Fine. He exhaled. Let's forget it. Say, I heard a joke about Ool yesterday. I meant to tell you. What do you say you fix breakfast and I'll tell the joke and let's not talk about all this? It was only a dream. Of course. He kissed her cheek mechanically. Only a dream. At noon the sun was high and hot and the hills shimmered in the light. Aren't you going to town? Asked Ela. Town? He raised his brows faintly. This is the day you always go. She adjusted a flower cage on its pedestal. The flowers stirred, opening their hungry yellow mouths. He closed his book. No, it's too hot. It's late. Oh. She finished her task and moved toward the door. Well, I'll be back soon. Wait a minute. Where are you going? She was in the door swiftly. Over to Powers. She invited me. Today? I haven't seen her in a long time. It's only a little way. Over in Green Valley, isn't it? Yes, just a walk. Not far. I thought I'd... She hurried. I'm sorry. Really sorry, he said, running to fetch her back, looking very concerned about his forgetfulness. It slipped my mind. I invited Dr. Null out this afternoon. Dr. Null? She edged toward the door. He caught her elbow and drew her steadily in. Yes. But Pow can wait, Ela. We must entertain Null. Just for a few minutes. No, Ela. No? He shook his head. No. Besides, it's a terribly long walk to Pow's. All the way over through Green Valley and then past the big canal and down, isn't it? It'll be very, very hot. Dr. Neal would be delighted to see you. Well? She did not answer. She wanted to break and run. She wanted to cry out. She only sat in the chair, turning her fingers over slowly, staring at them expressionlessly, trapped. Ela, he murmured, you will be here, won't you? Yes, she said after a long time. I'll be here. All afternoon? Her voice was dull. All afternoon. Late in the day, Dr. Neal had not put in an appearance. Ela's husband did not seem overly surprised. When it was quite late, he murmured something, went to a closet, and drew forth an evil weapon, a long yellowish tube ending in a bellows and a trigger. He turned, and upon his face was a mask, hammered from silver metal, expressionless. The mask that he always wore when he wished to hide his feelings. The mask which curved and hollowed so exquisitely to his thin cheeks and chin and brow. The mask glinted. He held the evil weapon in his hands, considering it. It hummed constantly, an insect hum. From it, hordes of golden bees could be flung out with a high shriek. Golden, horrid bees that stung, poisoned, and fell lifeless like seeds on the sand. Where are you going? She asked. What? He listened to the bellows, to the evil hum. If Dr. Neal is late, I'll be damned if I'll wait. Going to hunt a bit. I'll be back. You be sure to stay right here now, won't you? The silver mask glimmered. Yes. Tell Dr. Neal I'll return. Just hunting. The triangular door closed. His footsteps faded down the hill. She watched him walking through the sunlight until he was gone. Then she resumed her tasks with the magnetic dusts and the new fruits to be plucked from the crystal walls. She worked with energy and dispatch. On occasion, a numbness took hold of her. She caught herself singing that odd and memorable song, looking out beyond the crystal pillars at the sky. She held her breath and stood very still, waiting. It was coming nearer. At any moment it might happen. It was like those days when you hear a thunderstorm coming. There was the waiting silence, and then the faintest pressure of the atmosphere as the climate blew over the land in shifts and shadows and vapors. And the change pressed at your ears. You were suspended in the waiting time of the coming storm. You began to tremble. The sky was stained and colored. The clouds were thickened. The mountains took on an iron taint. The caged flowers blew with faint sighs of warning. You felt your hair stir softly. Somewhere in the house, the voice clock sang, "Time, time, time, time," ever so gently, no more than water tapping on velvet. And then the storm. The electric illumination, the engulfments of dark wash and sounding black fell down, shutting in forever. That's how it was now. A storm gathered, yet the sky was clear. Lightning was expected, yet there was no cloud. Ela moved through the breathless summer house. Lightning would strike from the sky in the instant. There'd be a thunderclap, a bowl of smoke, a silence, footsteps on the path, a rap on the crystalline door, and her running to answer. "Crazy Ela," she scoffed. "Why think these wild things with your idle mind?" And then it happened. There was a warmth as if a great fire passing in the air, a whirling, rushing sound, a gleam in the sky of metal. Ela cried out. Running through the pillars, she flung open the door. She faced the hills, but this time there was nothing. She was about to race down the hill when she stopped herself. She was supposed to stay here, go nowhere. The doctor was coming to visit. Her husband would be angry if she ran off. She waited in the door, breathing rapidly, her hand out. She strained to see over toward Green Valley, but saw nothing. Silly woman. She went inside. You and your imagination, she thought. There was nothing but a bird, a leaf, the wind, or a fish in the canal. Sit down. Rest. She sat down. A shot sounded, very clearly, sharply, the sound of the evil insect weapon. Her body jerked with it. Came from a long way off. One shot. Swift humming distant bees. One shot. And then a second shot, precise and cold and far away. Her body winced again, and for some reason she started up, screaming and screaming, never wanting to stop screaming. She ran violently through the house and once more threw wide the door. Echoes were dying away. Away. Gone. She waited in the yard, her face pale, for 5 minutes. Finally, with slow steps, her head down, she wandered about the pillared rooms, laying her hand to things, her lips quivering, till finally she sat alone in the darkening wine room, waiting. She began to wipe an amber glass with the hem of her scarf. And then from far off, the sound of footsteps crunching on the thin, small rocks. She rose up to stand in the center of the quiet room. The glass fell from her fingers, smashing to bits. Footsteps hesitated outside the door. Should she speak? Should she cry out? "Come in, oh, come in." She went forward a few paces. The footsteps walked up the ramp. Hand twisted the door latch. She smiled at the door. The door opened. She stopped, smiling. It was her husband. His silver mask glowed dully. He entered the room and looked at her for only a moment. He snapped the weapon's bellows open, cracked out 2 dead bees, heard them spat on the floor as they fell, stepped on them, placed the empty bellows gun in the corner of the room as Ela bent down and tried over and over with no success to pick up the pieces of the shattered glass. "What were you doing?" she asked. "Nothing," he said with his back turned. He removed the mask. "But the gun, I heard you fire it. Twice." "Just hunting. Once in a while you like to hunt. Did Dr. Knoll arrive?" "No." "Wait a minute." He snapped his fingers disgustedly. "Why, I remember now. You were supposed to visit us tomorrow afternoon. How stupid of me." He sat down to eat. She looked at her food and did not move her hands. "What's wrong?" he asked, not looking up from dipping his meat in the bubbling lava. "I don't know. I'm not hungry," she said. "Why not?" "I don't know. I'm just not." The wind was rising across the sky. The sun was going down. The room was small and suddenly cold. "I've been trying to remember," she said in the silent room across from her cold, erect, golden-eyed husband. "Remember what?" He sipped his wine. "That song. That fine and beautiful song." She closed her eyes and hummed, but it was not the song. "I've forgotten it. Somehow I don't want to forget it. Something I want always to remember." She moved her hands as if the rhythm might help her to remember all of it. Then she lay back in her chair. "I can't remember." She began to cry. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "I don't know. I don't know. I can't help it. I'm sad and I don't know why. I cry and I don't know why, but I'm crying." Her head was in her hands. Her shoulders moved again and again. "You'll be all right tomorrow," he said. She did not look up at him. She looked only at the empty desert and the very bright stars coming out now in the black sky. Far away there was a sound of wind rising and canal water stirring cold in the long canals. She shut her eyes, trembling. "Yes," she said. "I'll be all right tomorrow." August 2030, the summer night. In the stone galleries, the people were gathered in clusters and groups, filtering up into the shadows among the blue hills. Soft evening light shone over them from the stars and the luminous double moons of Mars. Beyond the marble amphitheater, in darkness and distances, lay little towns and villas. Pools of silver water stood motionless, and canals glittered from horizon to horizon. It was an evening in summer upon the placid and temperate planet Mars. Up and down green wine canals, boats as delicate as bronze flowers drifted. The long and endless dwellings that curved like tranquil snakes across the hills, lovers lay idly whispering in cool night beds. The last children ran in torchlit alleys, gold spiders in their hands throwing out films of web. Here or there a late summer was prepared in tables where lava bubbled silvery and hushed. In the amphitheaters of 100 towns on that night side of Mars, the brown Martian people with gold coin eyes were leisurely met to fix their attention upon stages where musicians made a serene music flow up like blossom scent on the still air. Upon one stage a woman sang. The audience stirred. She stopped singing. She put her hand to her throat. She nodded to the musicians, and they began again. The musicians played and she sang, and this time the audience sighed and sat forward. Two of the men stood up in surprise, and a winter chill moved through the amphitheater. It was an odd and a frightening and a strange song this woman sang. She tried to stop the words from coming out of her lips, but the words were these: "She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. All that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." The singer clasped her hands to her mouth. She stood bewildered. "What words are those?" asked the musicians. "What song is that? What language is that?" When they blew again upon their golden horns, the strange music came forth and passed slowly over the audience, which now talked aloud and stood up. "What's wrong with you?" the musicians asked each other. "What tune is that you played?" "What tune did you play?" The woman wept and ran from the stage. The audience moved out of the amphitheater. All around the nervous towns of Mars, a similar thing had happened. A coldness had come, like white snow falling on the air. In the black valleys under the torches, the children sang, "And when she got there, the cupboard was bare, so her poor dog had none." "Children," voices cried, "what was that rhyme? Where did you learn it?" "We just thought it all of a sudden. It's just words we don't understand." Doors slammed. The streets were deserted. Above the blue hills, a green star rose. All over the night side of Mars, lovers awoke to listen to their loved ones who lay humming in the darkness. "What is that tune?" And in 1,000 villas, in the middle of the night, women awoke screaming. They had to be soothed while the tears ran down their faces. There, sleep. What's wrong? A dream? Something terrible will happen in the morning." "Nothing can happen. All is well with us." A hysterical sobbing. "It's coming nearer and nearer and nearer." "Nothing can happen to us. What could? Sleep now. Sleep." It was quiet in the deep morning of Mars, as quiet as a cool and black well, the stars shining in the canal waters and breathing in every room, the children curled with their spiders in closed hands, the lovers arm in arm, The moon's gone, the torch is cold, the stone amphitheater's deserted. The only sound just before dawn was a night watchman far away down a lonely street, walking along in the darkness, humming a very strange song. August 2030. The Earthmen. Whoever was knocking at the door didn't want to stop. Mrs. T threw the door open. "Well? You speak English!" The man standing there was astounded. "I speak what I speak," she said. "It's wonderful English." The man was in uniform. There were 3 men with him in a great hurry, all smiling, all dirty. "What do you want?" demanded Mrs. T. "You are a Martian," the man smiled. "The word is not familiar to you, certainly. It's an Earth expression." He nodded at his men. "We are from Earth. I'm Captain Williams. We've landed on Mars within the hour. Here we are, the 2nd expedition. There was a 1st expedition, but we don't know what happened to it. But here we are, anyway, and you are the first Martian we've met." "Martian?" Her eyebrows went up. "What I mean to say is you live on the 4th planet from the sun, correct?" "Elementary," she snapped, eyeing them. "And we," he pressed his chubby pink hand to his chest, "we are from Earth. Right, men?" "Right, sir," a chorus. "This is the planet Tur," she said, "if you want to use the proper name." "Tur. Tur." The captain laughed exhaustedly. "What a fine name! My good woman, how is it you speak such perfect English?" "I'm not speaking, I'm thinking," she said. "Telepathy. Good day." And she slammed the door. A moment later there was that dreadful man knocking again. She whipped the door open. What now? She wondered. The man was still there, trying to smile, looking bewildered. He put out his hands. "I don't think you understand." "What?" she snapped. The man gazed at her in surprise. "We're from Earth." "I haven't time," she said. "I've a lot of cooking today, and there's cleaning and sewing and all. You evidently wish to see Mr. T. He's upstairs in his study." "Yes," said the Earth man confusedly, blinking. "By all means. Let us see Mr. T. He's busy." She slammed the door again. This time the knock on the door was most impertinently loud. "See here," cried the man when the door was thrust open again. He jumped in as if to surprise her. "This is no way to treat visitors." "All over my clean floor," she cried. "Mud! Get out! If you come in my house, wash your boots first." The man looked in dismay at his muddy boots. "This," he said, "is no time for trivialities, I think," he said. "We should be celebrating." He looked at her for a long time, as if it looking might make her understand. "If you've made my crystal buns fall in the oven," she exclaimed, "I'll hit you with a piece of wood." She peered into a little hot oven. She came back, red, steamy-faced. Her eyes were sharp yellow. Her skin was soft brown. She was thin and quick as an insect. Her voice was metallic and sharp. "Wait here. I'll see if I can let you have a moment with Mr. T. What was your business?" The man swore luridly, as if she'd hit his hand with a hammer. "Tell him we're from Earth and it's never been done before." "What hasn't?" She put her brown hand up. "Never mind. I'll be back." The sound of her feet fluttering through the stone house. Outside, the immense blue Martian sky was hot and still as warm, deep sea water. The Martian desert lay broiling like a prehistoric mud pot, waves of heat rising and shimmering. There was a small rocket ship reclining upon a hilltop nearby. Large footprints came from the rocket to the door of the stone house. Now there was a sound of quarreling voices upstairs. The men within the door stared at one another, shifting on their boots, twiddling their fingers, holding onto their hip belts. A man's voice shouted upstairs. The woman's voice replied. After 15 minutes, the Earthmen began walking in and out of the kitchen door with nothing to do. "Cigarette?" said one of the men. Somebody got out a pack and they lit up. They puffed slow streams of pale white smoke. They adjusted their uniforms, fixed their collars. The voices upstairs continued to mutter and chant. The leader of the men looked at his watch. 25 minutes, he said. "I wonder what they're up to up there." Went to a window and looked out. "Hot day," said one of the men. "Yeah," said someone else in the slow, warm time of early afternoon. The voices had faded to a murmur and were now silent. There was not a sound in the house. All the men could hear was their own breathing. An hour of silence passed. "I hope we didn't cause any trouble," said the captain. He went and peered into the living room. Mrs. T was there, watering some flowers that grew in the center of the room. "I knew I'd forgotten something," she said when she saw the captain. She walked out to the kitchen. "I'm sorry." She handed him a slip of paper. "Mr. T is much too busy." She turned to her cooking. "Anyway, it's not Mr. T you want to see. Mr. Ah. Take that paper over to the next farm by the Blue Canal. Mr. A will advise you about whatever it is you want to know." "We don't want to know anything," objected the captain, pouting out his thick lips. "We already know it." "You have the paper. What more do you want?" she asked him straight off, and she would say no more. "Well," said the captain, reluctant to go. He stood as if waiting for something. Looked like a child staring at an empty Christmas tree. "Well," he said again. "Come on, men." The 4 men stepped out into the hot, silent day. Half an hour later, Mr. A, seated in his library, sipped a bit of electric fire from a metal cup, heard the voices outside on the stone causeway. He leaned over the window-sill and gazed at the 4 uniformed men who squinted up at him. "Are you Mr. A?" they called. "I am." Mr. T sent us to see you," shouted the captain. "Why did he do that?" asked Mr. A. "He was busy." "Well, that's a shame," said Mr. A. "Does he think I have nothing else to do but entertain people he's too busy to bother with?" "That's not the important thing, sir," shouted the captain. "Well, it is to me. I have much reading to do. Mr. T is inconsiderate. This is not the first time he has been this thoughtless of me. Stop waving your hands, sir, till I finish, and pay attention. People usually listen to me when I talk, and you'll listen courteously, or I won't talk at all." Uneasily, the 4 men in the court shifted and opened their mouths, and once the captain, the veins on his face bulging, showed a few little tears in his eyes. "Now," lectured Mr. A, "do you think it fair of Mr. T to be so ill-mannered?" The 4 men gazed up through the heat. The captain said, "We're from Earth." "I think it very ungentlemanly of him," brooded Mr. A. "A rocket ship. We came in it. Over there." "Not the first time T's been unreasonable, you know." "All the way from Earth." "Why, for half a mind I'd call him up and tell him off." "Just the 4 of us, myself and these 3 men, my crew." "I'll call him up. Yes, that's what I'll do." "Earth, rocket, men, trip, space." "Call him and give him a good lashing," cried Mr. A. He vanished like a puppet from a stage. For a minute there were angry voices back and forth over some weird mechanism or other. Below, the captain and his crew glanced longingly back at the pretty rocket ship lying on the hillside, so sweet and lovely and fine. Mr. A jerked up in the window, wildly triumphant. "Challenge him to a duel, by the gods! A duel!" "Mr. A," the captain started all over again quietly. "I'll shoot him dead, do you hear?" "Mr. A, I'd like to tell you. We came 60 million miles." Mr. A regarded the captain for the first time. "Where'd you say you were from?" The captain flashed a white smile. Aside to his men, he whispered, "Now we're getting someplace." "Mr. A," he called, "we traveled 60 million miles from Earth." Mr. A yawned. "That's only 50 million miles this time of year." Picked up a frightful-looking weapon. "Well, I have to go now. Just take that silly note, I don't know what good it'll do you, and go over that hill into the little town of Loper and tell Mr. I all about it. He's the man you want to see, not Mr. T. He's an idiot. I'm going to kill him. Not me, because you're not in my line of work." Line of work, bleated the captain. "Do you have to be in a certain line of work to welcome Earthmen?" "Don't be silly. Everyone knows that." Mr. A rushed downstairs. "Goodbye." And down the causeway he raced like a pair of wild calipers. The 4 travelers stood shocked. Finally the captain said, "We'll find someone yet who'll listen to us." "Maybe we could come out and come in again," said one of the men in a dreary voice. "Maybe we should take off and land again. Give them time to organize a party." "That might be a good idea," murmured the tired captain. The little town was full of people drifting in and out of doors, saying hello to one another, wearing golden masks and blue masks and crimson masks for pleasant variety, masks with silver lips and bronze eyebrows, masks that smiled or masks that frowned, according to the owner's dispositions. The 4 men, wet from their long walk, paused and asked a little girl where Mr. I's house was. "There?" The child nodded her head. The captain got eagerly, carefully down on one knee, looking into her sweet young face. "Little girl, I want to talk to you." He seated her on his knee and folded her small brown hands neatly in his own big ones, as if ready for a bedtime story, which he was shaping in his mind slowly, with a great patient happiness in detail. "Well, here's how it is, little girl. 6 months ago, another rocket came to Mars. There was a man named York in it, and his assistant. Whatever happened to them, we don't know. Maybe they crashed. They came in a rocket. So did we. You should see it. A big rocket. So we're at the second expedition, following up the first. We came all the way from Earth." The little girl disengaged one hand without thinking about it and clapped an expressionless golden mask over her face. Then she pulled forth a golden spider toy, dropped it to the ground while the captain talked on. The toy spider climbed back up to her knee obediently, while she speculated upon it coolly through the slits of her emotionless mask. The captain shook her gently, urged his story upon her. "We're Earthmen," he said. "Do you believe me?" "Yes." The little girl peeped at the way she was wiggling her toes in the dust. "Fine." The captain pinched her arm, a little bit with joviality, a little bit with meanness to get her to look at him. "We built our own rocket ship. Do you believe that?" The little girl dug in her nose with a finger. "Yes." "And take your finger out of your nose, little girl. I am the captain, and never before in history has anybody come across space in a big rocket ship," recited the little creature, eyes shut. "Wonderful. How did you know?" "Oh, telepathy." She wiped a casual finger on her knee. "Aren't you just ever so excited?" cried the captain. "Aren't you glad?" "You just better go see Mr. I right away." She dropped her toy to the ground. "Mr. I will like talking to you." She ran off with the toy spider scuttling obediently after her. The captain squatted there, looking after her with his hand out. His eyes were watery in his head. He looked at his empty hands. His mouth hung open. The other 3 men stood with their shadows under them. They spat on the stone street. Mr. I answered his door. He was on his way to a lecture, but he had a minute if they would hurry inside and tell him what they desired. "A little attention," said the captain, red-eyed and tired. "We're from Earth. We have a rocket. There are 4 of us, crew and captain. We're exhausted. We're hungry. We'd like a place to sleep. We'd like someone to give us the key to the city or something like that. We'd like somebody to shake our hands and say, 'Hooray,' and say, 'Congratulations, old man.' That about sums it up." Mr. I was a tall, vaporous, thin man with thick, blind blue crystals over his yellowish eyes. He bent over his desk and brooded upon some papers, glancing now and again with extreme penetration at his guests. "Well, I haven't the forms with me here, I don't think." He rummaged through the desk drawers. "Now, where did I put the forms?" he mused. Somewhere. Oh, here we are. Now," he handed the papers over crisply. "You'll have to sign these papers, of course." "Do we have to go through all this rigmarole?" Mr. I gave him a thick, glassy look. "You say you're from Earth, don't you? Well, then there's nothing for it but you sign." The captain wrote his name. "Do you want my crew to sign also?" Mr. I looked at the captain, looked at the 3 others, burst into a shout of derision. "Them sign? Ha! How marvelous! Them sign!" Tears sprang from his eyes. He slapped his knee and bent to let his laughter jerk out of his gaping mouth. He held himself up with the desk. "Them sign?" The 4 men scowled. "What's funny?" "Them sign," sighed Mr. I, weak with hilarity. "So very funny. Have to tell Mr. X about this." He examined the filled-out form, still laughing. "Everything seems to be in order," he nodded. "Even the agreement for euthanasia, if final decision on such a step is necessary." He chuckled. "Agreement for what?" "Don't talk. I have something for you. Here, take this key." The captain flushed. "It's a great honor." "Not the key to the city, you fool," snapped Mr. I. "It's the key to the house. Go down that corridor, unlock the big door, and go inside and shut the door tight. You'll spend the night there. In the morning I'll send Mr. X to see you." Dubiously, the captain took the key in hand. He stood looking at the floor. His men did not move. They seemed to be emptied of all their blood and their rocket fever. They were drained dry. "What is it? What's wrong?" inquired Mr. I. "What are you waiting for? What do you want?" He came and peered up into the captain's face, stooping. "Out with it, you!" I don't suppose you could even, suggested the captain. I mean, that is, try to, or think about, he hesitated. We've worked hard. We've come a long way. Maybe you could just shake our hands and say, well done. Do you think? His voice faded. Mr. I stuck out his hand stiffly. Congratulations. He smiled a cold smile. Congratulations. He turned away. I must go now. Use that key. Without noticing them again, as if they had melted down through the floor, Mr. I moved about the room, packing a little manuscript case with papers. He was in the room another 5 minutes, but never again addressed the solemn quartet that stood with heads down, their heavy legs sagging, the light dwindling from their eyes. Mr. I went out the door. He was busy looking at his fingernails. They straggled along the corridor in the dull, silent afternoon light. They came to a large burnished silver door. The silver key opened it. They entered, shut the door, and turned. They were in a vast, sunlit hall. Men and women sat at tables and stood in conversing groups. At the sound of the door, they regarded the 4 uniformed men. One Martian stepped forward, bowing. I am Mr. Yu, he said. And I am Captain Jonathan Williams of New York City of Earth, said the captain without emphasis. Immediately the hall exploded. The rafters trembled with shouts and cries. People rushing forward, waving and shrieking, happily knocked down tables, swarming, rollicking, seizing the 4 Earthmen, lifting them swiftly to their shoulders. They charged about the hall 6 times, making a full and wonderful circuit of the room, jumping, bounding, singing. The Earthmen were so stunned they rode the trampling shoulders for a full minute before they began to laugh and shout at each other. Hey, this is more like it. This is the life, boy. Yay, yow, whoopee! They winked tremendously at each other. They flung up their hands to clap in the air. Hey! Hooray, said the crowd. They set the Earthmen on a table. The shouting died. The captain almost broke into tears. Thank you. It's good. It's good. Tell us about yourselves, suggested Mr. Yu. The captain cleared his throat. The audience oh'd and ah'd as the captain talked. He introduced his crew. Each made a small speech and was embarrassed by the thunderous applause. Mr. Yu clapped the captain's shoulder. It's good to see another man from Earth. I am from Earth also. How is that again? There are many of us here from Earth. You? From Earth? The captain stared. But is that possible? Did you come by rocket? Has space travel been going on for centuries? His voice was disappointed. What country are you from? Turillo. I came by the spirit of my body years ago. Turillo, the captain mouthed the words. I don't know that country. What's this about spirit of body? And Miss R over here, she's from Earth, too. Aren't you, Miss R? Miss R nodded and laughed strangely. So is Mr. W, Mr. Q, Mr. V. I'm from Venus. I'm from Jupiter, declared one man, preening himself. I'm from Saturn, said another, eyes glinting slyly. Jupiter? Saturn, murmured the captain, blinking. It was very quiet now. People stood around and sat at the tables, which were strangely empty for banquet tables. The yellow eyes were glowing. There were dark shadows under their cheekbones. The captain noticed for the first time that there were no windows. The light seemed to permeate the walls. There was only one door. The captain winced. This is confusing. Where on earth is this Turillo? Is it near America? What is America? You never heard of America. You say you're from Earth and yet you don't know. Mr. Yu drew himself up angrily. Earth is a place of seas and nothing but seas. There is no land. I am from Earth and no. Wait a minute, the captain sat back. You look like regular Martians. Yellow eyes, brown skin. Earth is a place of all jungle, said Mrs. R. proudly. I'm from Ori on Earth, a civilization built of silver. Now the captain turned his head from and then to Mr. U, and then to Mr. W, Mr. Z, Mr. N, Mr. H, Mr. B. He saw their yellow eyes waxing and waning in the light, focusing and unfocusing. He began to shiver. Finally, he turned to his men and regarded them somberly. Do you realize what this is? What, sir? This is no celebration, replied the captain tiredly. This is no banquet. These aren't government representatives. This is no surprise party. Look at their eyes. Listen to them. Nobody breathed. Only a soft white move of eyes in the close room. Now I understand. Captain's voice was far away. Why everyone gave us notes and passed us on, one from the other, till we met Mr. I, who sent us down a corridor with a key to open a door and shut a door. Here we are. Where are we, sir? The captain exhaled. In an insane asylum. It was night. The large hall lay quiet and dimly illuminated by hidden light sources in the transparent walls. The 4 Earthmen sat around a wooden table, their bleak heads bent over their whispers. On the floors, men and women lay huddled. There were little stirs in the dark corners, solitary men or women gesturing with their hands. Every half hour, one of the captain's men would try the silver door and return to the table. Nothing doing, sir. We're locked in proper. They think we're really insane, sir? Quite. That's why there was no hullabaloo to welcome us. They merely tolerated what, to them, must be a constantly recurring psychotic condition. He gestured at the dark, sleeping shapes all about them. Paranoids, every single one. What a welcome they gave us. For a moment there, a little fire rose and died in his eyes. Thought we were getting our true reception. All the yelling and singing and speeches. Pretty nice, wasn't it? Well, it lasted. How long will they keep us here, sir? Until we prove we're not psychotic. That should be easy. I hope so. You don't sound very certain, sir. I'm not. Look in that corner. A man squatted alone in the darkness. Out of his mouth issued a blue flame which turned into a round shape of a small, naked woman. It flourished on the air softly in vapors of cobalt light, whispering and sighing. The captain nodded at another corner. A woman stood there, changing. First, she was embedded in a crystal pillar, and she melted into a golden statue, finally a staff of polished cedar, and back to a woman. All through the midnight hall, people were juggling thin, violet flames, shifting, changing, for nighttime was a time of change and affliction. Magicians, sorcerers, whispered one of the Earthmen. No, hallucinations. They pass their insanity over into us so that we see their hallucinations too. Telepathy. Autosuggestion and telepathy. Is that what worries you, sir? Yes. If hallucinations can appear this real to us, to anyone, if hallucinations are catching and almost believable, it's no wonder they mistook us for psychotics. If that man can produce little blue fire women, and that woman there melt into a pillar, how natural if normal Martians think we produce our rocket ship with our minds. Oh, said his men in the shadows. Around them in the vast hall, flames leaped blue, flared, evaporated. Little demons of red sand ran between the teeth of sleeping men. Women became oily snakes. There was a smell of reptiles and animals. In the morning, everyone stood around looking fresh, happy, and normal. There were no flames or demons in the room. The captain and his men waited by the silver door, hoping it would open. Mr. X arrived after about 4 hours. They had a suspicion that he had waited outside the door, peering in at them for at least 3 hours before he stepped in, beckoning, and led them to a small office. He was a jovial, smiling man, if one could believe the mask he wore, for upon it was painted not 1 smile, but 3. Behind it, his voice was the voice of a not-so-smiling psychologist. What seems to be the trouble? You think we're insane, and we're not, said the captain. Contrarily, I do not think all of you are insane. The psychologist pointed a little wand at the captain. No, just you, sir. The others are secondary hallucinations. The captain slapped his knee. So that's it. That's why Mr. I laughed when I suggested my men sign the papers too. Yes, Mr. I told me. The psychologist laughed out of the carved, smiling mouth. A good joke. Where was I? Secondary hallucinations, yes. Women come to me with snakes crawling from their ears. When I cure them, the snakes vanish. We'll be glad to be cured. Go right ahead. Mr. X seemed surprised. Unusual. Not many people want to be cured. The cure is drastic, you know. Cure ahead. I'm confident you'll find we're all sane. Let me check your papers to be sure they're in order for a cure. You checked a file. Yes. You know, such cases as yours need special curing. People in that hall are simpler forms. Once you've gone this far, I must point out, with primary, secondary, auditory, olfactory, and labial hallucinations, as well as tactile and optical fantasies, it's pretty bad business. We have to resort to euthanasia. The captain leaped up with a roar. Look here! We've stood quite enough. Test us, tap our knees, check our hearts, exercises, ask questions. You are free to speak. The captain raved for an hour. The psychologist listened. Incredible, he mused. Most detailed dream fantasy I've ever heard. God damn it, we'll show you the rocket ship, screamed the captain. I'd like to see it. Can you manifest it in this room? Oh, certainly. It's in that file of yours under R. Mr. X peered seriously into his file. He went and shut the file solemnly. Why did you tell me to look? The rocket isn't there. Of course not, you idiot. I was joking. Does an insane man joke? You find some odd senses of humor. Now take me out to your rocket. I wish to see it. It was noon. The day was very hot when they reached the rocket. So, the psychologist walked up to the ship and tapped it. It gonged softly. May I go inside? He asked slyly. You may. Mr. X stepped in and was gone for a long time. Of all the silly, exasperating things, Captain chewed a cigar as he waited. For 2 cents, I'd go back home and tell people not to bother with Mars. What a suspicious bunch of louts. I gather that a good number of their population are insane, sir. It seems to be their main reason for doubting. Nevertheless, this is also damned irritating. The psychologist emerged from the ship after half an hour of growling, tapping, listening, smelling, tasting. Now do you believe? Shouted the captain as if he were deaf. The psychologist shut his eyes and scratched his nose. This is the most incredible example of sensual hallucination and hypnotic suggestion I've ever encountered. I went through your rocket, as you call it. He tapped the hull. I hear it. Auditory fantasy. He drew a breath. I smell it. Olfactory hallucination induced by sensual telepathy. He kissed the ship. I taste it. Labial fantasy. He shook the captain's hand. May I congratulate you. You are a psychotic genius. You've done a most complete job. The task of projecting your psychotic image life into the mind of another via telepathy and keeping the hallucinations from becoming sensually weaker is almost impossible. Those people in the house usually concentrate on visuals, or at the most, visuals and auditory fantasies combined. You have balanced the whole conglomeration. Your insanity is beautifully complete. My insanity. The captain was pale. Yes, what a lovely insanity. Metal, rubber, food, clothing, fuel, weapons, ladders, nuts, bolts, spoons. 10,000 separate items I checked on your vessel. Never have I seen such complexity. There were even shadows under the bunks and under everything. Such concentration of will. Everything, no matter how or when tested, had a smell, a solidity, a taste, a sound. Let me embrace you. He stood back at last. I'll write this into my greatest monograph. I'll speak of it at the Martian Academy next month. Look at you. Why, you've even changed your eye color from yellow to blue, your skin to pink from brown. Those clothes, your hands having 5 fingers instead of 6. Biological metamorphosis through psychological imbalance. And your 3 friends. He held out a little gun. Incurable, of course. You poor wonderful man. You'll be happy you're dead. Have you any last words? Stop, for God's sake! Don't shoot! You sad creature. I shall put you out of this misery which has driven you to imagine this rocket and these 3 men. It'll be most engrossing to watch your friends and your rocket vanish once I have killed you. I will write a neat paper on the dissolvement of neurotic images from what I perceive here today. I'm from Earth! My name is Jonathan Williams, and these... Yes, I know, soothed Mr. X and fired his gun. The captain fell with a bullet in his heart. The other 3 men screamed. Mr. X stared at them. You continue to exist? This is superb. Hallucinations with time and spatial persistence. He pointed the gun at them. Well, I'll scare you into dissolving. No, cried the 3 men. An auditory appeal, even with the patient dead, observed Mr. X as he shot the 3 men down. They lay on the sand, intact, not moving. He kicked them. Then he rapped on the ship. It persists. They persist. He fired his gun again and again at the bodies. Then he stood back. The smiling mask dropped from his face. Slowly, the little psychologist's face changed. His jaw sagged. The gun dropped from his fingers. His eyes were dull and vacant. He put his hands up and turned in a blind circle. He fumbled at the bodies, saliva filling his mouth. Hallucinations, he mumbled frantically. Taste, sight, smell, sound, feeling. He waved his hands. His eyes bulged. His mouth began to give off a faint froth. "Go away!" he shouted at the bodies. "Go away!" he screamed at the ship. He examined his trembling hands. "Contaminated," he whispered wildly. "Carried over into me. Telepathy. Hypnosis. Now I'm insane. Now I'm contaminated. Hallucinations in all their sensual forms." He stopped and searched around with his numb hands for the gun. Only one cure. Only one way to make them go away. Vanish. A shot rang out. Mr. X fell. The 4 bodies lay in the sun. Mr. X lay where he fell. The rocket reclined on the sunny little hill and didn't vanish. When the town people found the rocket at sunset, they wondered what it was. Nobody knew, so it was sold to a junk man and hauled off to be broken up for scrap metal. That night it rained all night. Next day was fair and warm. March 2031. The taxpayer. He wanted to go to Mars on the rocket. He went down to the rocket field in the early morning and yelled in through the wire fence at the men in uniform that he wanted to go to Mars. He told them he was a taxpayer. His name was Pritchard. He had a right to go to Mars. Wasn't he born right here in Ohio? Wasn't he a good citizen? Then why couldn't he go to Mars? He shook his fists at them, told them that he wanted to get away from Earth. Anybody with any sense wanted to get away from Earth. There was going to be a big atomic war on Earth in about 2 years, and he didn't want to be here when it happened. He and thousands of others like him, if they had any sense, would go to Mars. See if they wouldn't. To get away from wars and censorship and statism and conscription and government control of this and that, of art and science, you could have Earth. He was offering his good right hand, his heart, his head for the opportunity to go to Mars. What did you have to do? What did you have to sign? Who did you have to know to get on the rocket? They laughed out through the wire screen at him. He didn't want to go to Mars, they said. Didn't he know that the first and second expeditions had failed, had vanished? The men were probably dead. But they couldn't prove it. They didn't know for sure, he said, clinging to the wire fence. Maybe it was a land of milk and honey up there. Captain York and Captain Williams had just never bothered to come back. Now they were going to open the gate and let him in to board the 3rd expeditionary rocket, or he was going to have to kick it down. They told him to shut up. He saw the men walking out to the rocket. "Wait for me," he cried. "Don't leave me here on this terrible world. I've got to get away. It's going to be an atom war. Don't leave me on Earth." They dragged him, struggling away. They slammed the police wagon door and drove him off into the early morning, his face pressed to the rear window, and just before they sirened over a hill, he saw the red fire and heard the big sound, felt a huge tremor as the silver rocket shot up, left him behind on an ordinary Monday morning on the ordinary planet Earth. April 2031, the 3rd expedition. The ship came down from space. It came from the stars and the black velocities, the shining movements, and the silent gulfs of space. It was a new ship, had fire in its body and men in its metal cells. It moved with a clean silence, fiery and warm. In it were 17 men, including a captain. The crowd at the Ohio field had shouted and waved their hands up into the sunlight, and the rocket had bloomed out great flowers of heat and color and ran away into space on the 3rd voyage to Mars. Now it was decelerating with metal efficiency in the upper Martian atmospheres. It was still a thing of beauty and strength. It moved in the midnight waters of space like a pale sea leviathan. It passed the ancient moon and thrown itself onward into one nothingness following another. The men within it had been battered, thrown about, sickened, made well again, each in his turn. One man had died, but now the remaining 16, with their eyes clear in their heads and their faces pressed to the thick glass ports, watched Mars swing up under them. "Mars," cried Navigator Lustig. "Mars," said Samuel Hinkston, archaeologist. "Well," said Captain John Black. The rocket landed on a lawn of green grass. Outside upon this lawn stood an iron deer. Further up on the green stood a tall brown Victorian house, quiet in the sunlight, all covered with scrolls and rococo, its windows made of blue and pink and yellow and green-colored glass. Upon the porch were hairy geraniums, an old swing which was hooked into the porch ceiling, which now swung back and forth in a little breeze. At the summit of the house was a cupola with diamond-leaded glass windows and a dunce cap roof. Through the front window, you could see a piece of music titled Beautiful Ohio, sitting on the music rest. Around the rocket in 4 directions spread the little town, green and motionless in the Martian spring. There were white houses and red brick ones, tall elm trees blowing in the wind, tall maples and horse chestnuts, and church steeples with golden bells silent in them. The rocket men looked out and saw this. Then they looked at one another, and then they looked out again. They held to each other's elbows, suddenly unable to breathe, it seemed. Their faces grew pale. "I'll be damned," whispered Lustig, rubbing his face with his numb fingers. "I'll be damned." "It just can't be," said Samuel Hingston. "Lord," said Captain John Black. There was a call from the chemist. "Sir, the atmosphere is thin for breathing. There's enough oxygen. It's safe." "Then we'll go out," said Lustig. "Hold on," said Captain John Black. "How do we know what this is?" "It's a small town with thin but breathable air in it, sir." "And it's a small town, the like of Earth towns," said Hingston, the archaeologist. "Incredible. It can't be, but it is." Captain John Black looked at him idly. "Do you think that the civilization of 2 planets can progress at the same rate and evolve in the same way, Hingston?" "I wouldn't have thought so, sir." Captain Black stood by the port. "Look out there. The geraniums, a specialized plant. That specific variety has only been known on Earth for 50 years. Think of the thousands of years it takes to evolve plants. Then tell me if it is logical that the Martians should have 1. Leaded glass windows, 2. Porch swings, 3. An instrument that looks like a piano and probably is a piano, and 4. If you look closely through this telescopic lens here, is it logical that a Martian composer would have published a piece of music titled, strangely enough, Beautiful Ohio, all of which means that we have an Ohio River on Mars?" "Captain Williams, of course," cried Hingston. "What?" "Captain Williams and his crew of 3 men. Or Nathaniel York and his partner. That would explain it." "That would explain absolutely nothing. As far as we've been able to figure, the York expedition exploded the day it reached Mars, killing York and his partner. As for Williams and his 3 men, their ship exploded the 2nd day after their arrival. Because the pulsations from their radios ceased at that time. So we figured that if the men were alive after that, they'd have contacted us. Anyway, the York expedition was only a year ago, while Captain Williams and his men landed here sometime during last August. Theorizing they are still alive, could they, even with the help of a brilliant Martian race, have built such a town as this and aged it in so short a time? Look at that town out there. Why, it's been standing here for the last 70 years. Look at the wood on the porch knoll. Look at the trees. A century old, all of them. No, this isn't York's work, or Williams. It's something else. I don't like it. I'm not leaving the ship until I know what it is." "For that matter," said Lustig, nodding, "Williams and his men, as well as York, landed on the opposite side of Mars. We were very careful to land on this side." "An excellent point. Just in case a hostile local tribe of Martians killed off York and Williams, we have instructions to land in a further region to forestall the recurrence of such a disaster. So here we are, as far as we know, in a land that Williams and York never saw." "Damn it," said Hingston. "I want to get out there into this town, sir, with your permission. Maybe there are similar thought patterns, civilization graphs on every planet in our sun system. We may be on the threshold of the greatest psychological and metaphysical discovery of our age." "I'm willing to wait a moment," said Captain John Black. "It may be, sir. We're looking upon a phenomenon that for the first time would absolutely prove the existence of God, sir." "There are many people who are of good faith without such proof, Mr. Hingston." "I'm one myself, sir. But certainly a town like this could not occur without divine intervention. The detail fills me with such feelings that I don't know whether to laugh or cry." "Do neither, then. Do we know what we're up against?" "Up against?" Lustig broke in. "Against nothing, Captain. It's a good, quiet, green town, a lot like the old-fashioned one I was born in. I like the looks of it." "When were you born, Lustig?" 1980, sir." "And you, Hingston?" 1985, sir. Griddle, Iowa. This looks like home to me." Hingston, Lustig. I could be either of your fathers. I'm just 80 years old, born in 1950 in Illinois, through the grace of God and a science that, in the last 50 years, knows how to make some old men young again. Here I am on Mars, not any more tired than the rest of you, but infinitely more suspicious. This town out here looks very peaceful and cool, so much like Green Bluff, Illinois, that it frightens me. It's too much like Green Bluff. He turned to the radio man. Radio Earth. Tell them we've landed. That's all. Tell them we'll radio a full report tomorrow. Yes, sir. Captain Black looked out the rocket port with his face that should have been the face of a man 80. Seemed like the face of a man in his 40th year. Tell you what we'll do, Lustig. You and I and Hingston will look the town over. The other men will stay aboard. If anything happens, they can get the hell out. A loss of 3 men is better than a whole ship. If something bad happens, our crew can warn the next rocket. That's Captain Wilder's rocket, I think, due to be ready to take off next Christmas. If there's something hostile about Mars, we certainly want the next rocket to be well armed. So are we. We've got a regular arsenal with us. Tell the men to stand by the guns, then. Come on, Lustig, Hingston. The 3 men walked together down through the levels of the ship. It was a beautiful spring day. A robin sat on a blossoming apple tree and sang continuously. Showers of petal snow sifted down when the wind touched the green branches. The blossom scent drifted upon the air. Somewhere in the town, someone was playing the piano, and the music came and went softly, drowsily. The song was Beautiful Ohio. Somewhere else, the phonograph, scratchy and faded, was hissing out a record of April Showers, sung by Al Jolson. The 3 men stood outside the ship. They sucked and gasped at the thin, thin air, moved slowly so as not to tire themselves. Now the phonograph record being played was Oh, Give Me a June Night, the Moonlight, and You. Lustig began to tremble. Samuel Hingston did likewise. The sky was serene and quiet. Somewhere a stream of water ran through the cool caverns and tree shadings of a ravine. Somewhere a horse and wagon trotted and rolled by, bumping. Sir, said Samuel Hingston, it must be, it has to be, that rocket travel to Mars began in the years before the First World War. No. How else could you explain these houses, the iron gear, the pianos, the music? Hingston took the captain's elbow persuasively and looked into the captain's face. Say that there were people in the year 1905 who hated war and got together with some scientists in secret, built a rocket and came out here to Mars. No, Hingston. Why not? The world was a different world in 1905. They could have kept it a secret much more easily. But a complex thing like a rocket, no, you couldn't keep it secret. And they came up here to live. And naturally, the houses they built were similar to Earth houses because they brought the culture with them. And they've lived here all these years, said the captain. In peace and quiet, yes. Maybe they made a few trips enough to bring enough people here for one small town, and stopped for fear of being discovered. That's why the town seems so old-fashioned. I don't see a thing myself older than the year 1927, do you? Or maybe, sir, rocket travel is older than we think. Perhaps it started in some part of the world centuries ago, was kept secret by the small number of men who came to Mars with only occasional visits to Earth over the centuries. You make it sound almost reasonable. It has to be. We've the proof here before us. All we have to do is find some people and verify it. The boots were deadened of all sound in the thick green grass. Smelled for a fresh mowing. In spite of himself, Captain John Black felt a great peace come over him. It had been 30 years since he'd been in a small town. The buzzing of spring bees on the air lulled and quieted him. The fresh look of things was a balm to the soul. He set foot upon the porch. Hollow echoes sounded from under the boards as they walked to the screen door. Inside they could see a bead curtain hung across the hall entry, and a crystal chandelier, and a Maxfield Parrish painting framed on one wall over a comfortable Morris chair. The house smelled old, and of the attic, infinitely comfortable. You could hear the tinkle of ice in a lemonade pitcher. The distant kitchen, because of the heat of the day, someone was preparing a cold lunch. Someone was humming under her breath, high and sweet. Captain John Black rang the bell. Footsteps, dainty and thin, came along the hall. A kind-faced lady of some 40 years, dressed in the sort of dress she might expect in the year 1939, peered out at them. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Beg your pardon," said Captain John Black, "but we're looking for, that is, could you help us?" He stopped. She looked out at him with dark, wondering eyes. "If you're selling something," she began. "No, wait," he cried. "What town is this?" She looked him up and down. "What do you mean, what town is this? How could you be in a town and not know the name?" The captain looked as if he wanted to go sit under a shady apple tree. "We're strangers here. We want to know how this town got here and how you got here." "Are you census takers?" "No." "Everyone knows," she said, "this town was built in 1868. Is this a game?" "No, not a game," cried the captain. "We're from Earth." "Out of the ground, do you mean?" she wondered. No, we came from the third planet Earth in a ship. We've landed here on the fourth planet Mars." "This," explained the woman as if she were addressing a child, "is Green Bluff, Illinois, on the continent of America, surrounded by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, on a place called the world, or sometimes the Earth. Go away now. Goodbye." She trotted down the hall, running her fingers through the beaded curtains. The three men looked at one another. "Let's knock the screen door in," said Lustig. "We can't do that. This is private property. Good God." They went to sit down on the porch step. "Did it ever strike you, Hingston, perhaps we got ourselves somehow in some way off track, by accident, came back and landed on Earth?" "How could we have done that?" I don't know. "Oh, God, let me think." Hingston said, "But we checked every mile of the way. Our chronometer said so many miles. Went past the moon and out into space, and here we are. I'm positive we're on Mars." Lustig said, "But suppose by accident, in space, in time, we got lost in the dimensions and landed on an Earth that is 60 or 70 years old. 70 years ago." "Oh, go away, Lustig." Lustig went to the door, rang the bell, and called into the cool, dim rooms. "What year is this?" 1956, of course," said the lady, sitting in a rocking chair, taking a sip of her lemonade. "Did you hear that?" Lustig turned wildly to the others. 1956. We have gone back in time. This is Earth." Lustig sat down, and the three men, in the wonder and terror let the terror and the wonder of the thought afflict them. Their hands stirred fitfully on their knees. The captain said, "I didn't ask for a thing like this. Scares the hell out of me. How can a thing like this happen? Wish we brought Einstein with us." "Will anyone in this town believe us?" said Hingston. "Are we playing with something dangerous? Time, I mean. Shouldn't we just take off and go home?" "No, not until we try another house." They walked 3 houses down to a little white cottage under an oak tree. "I like to be as logical as I can," said the captain. "I don't believe we've put our finger on it yet. Suppose, Hingston, as you originally suggested, that rocket travel occurred years ago. And when the Earth people lived here a number of years, they began to get homesick for Earth. First a mild neurosis about it, then a full-fledged psychosis, then threatened insanity. What would you do as a psychiatrist if faced with such a problem?" Hingston thought. "Well, I think I'd arrange the civilization on Mars so it resembled Earth more and more each day. If there's any way of reproducing every plant, every road, every lake, even an ocean, I'd do so. Then by some vast crowd hypnosis, I'd convince everyone in a town this size that this really was Earth, not Mars at all. Good enough, Hingston. I think we're on the right track now. That woman in that house back there just thinks she's living on Earth. It protects her sanity. She and all the others in this town are the patients of the greatest experiment in migration and hypnosis you will ever lay eyes on in your life." "That's it, sir," cried Lustig. "Right," said Hingston. "Well," the captain sighed, "now we got somewhere. I feel better. It's all a bit more logical. That talk about time and going back and forth and traveling through time turns my stomach upside down. But this way," the captain smiled. Well, looks as if we'll be fairly popular here." "Or will we?" said Lustig. "After all, like the Pilgrims, these people came here to escape Earth. Maybe they won't be too happy to see us. Maybe they'll try to drive us out or kill us. We have superior weapons. Next house now. Up we go." They had hardly crossed the lawn when Lustig stopped and looked off across the town down the quiet, dreaming afternoon street. "Sir," he said. "What is it, Lustig?" "Oh, sir, what I see, said Lustig, and he began to cry. His fingers came up, twisting and shaking, and his face was all wonder and joy and incredulity. He sounded as if at any moment he might go quite insane with happiness. He looked down the street and began to run, stumbling awkwardly, falling, picking himself up, and running on. Look! Don't let him get away!" The captain broke into a run. Now Lustig was running swiftly, shouting. He turned into a yard halfway down the shady street and leaped up on the porch of a large greenhouse with an iron rooster on the roof. He was beating at the door, hollering and crying, when Hingston and the captain ran up behind him. They're all gasping and wheezing, exhausted from their run in the thin air. "Grandma! Grandpa!" cried Lustig. 2 old people stood in the doorway. "David!" Their voices piped, and they rushed out to embrace and pat him on the back and move around him. "David! Oh, David, it's been so many years! How you've grown, boy! How big you are, boy! Oh, David! Boy, how are you?" "Grandma! Grandpa!" sobbed David Lustig. "You look fine!" He held them, turned them, kissed them, hugged them, cried on them, held them out again, blinking at the little old people. The sun was in the sky, the wind blew, the grass was green, the screen door stood wide. "Come in, boy, come in. There's iced tea for you, fresh, lots of it." "I got friends here." Lustig turned and waved at the captain and Hingstig, frantically laughing. "Captain, come on up." "Howdy," said the old people. "Come in. Any friends of David are our friends, too. Don't stand there." In the living room of the old house it was cool, and a grandfather clock ticked high and long and bronzed in one corner. There were soft pillows on large couches and walls filled with books, a rug cut in a thick rose pattern, and iced tea in the hand, sweating and cool on the thirsty tongue. "Here's to our health." Grandma tipped her glass to her porcelain teeth. "How long you been here, Grandma?" said Lustig. "Ever since we died," she said tartly. "Ever since you what?" Captain John Black set down his glass. "Oh, yes," Lustig nodded. "They've been dead 30 years. "And you sit there calmly?" shouted the captain. "Tsh!" The old woman winked glitteringly. "Who are you to question what happens? Here we are. What's life, anyway? Who does what, for why, and where? All we know is here we are, alive again, and no questions asked. A second chance." She toddled over and held out her thin wrist. "Feel." The captain felt. "Solid, ain't it?" she asked. He nodded. "Well, then," she asked triumphantly, "why go around questioning?" "Well," said the captain, "it's simply that we never thought we'd find a thing like this on Mars. And now you've found it. I dare say there's lots on every planet that'll show you God's infinite ways." "Is this heaven?" asked Hingston. "Nonsense, no. It's the world, and we got a second chance. Nobody told us why. Then nobody told us why we were on Earth either. That other Earth, I mean, the one you came from. How do we know there wasn't another before that one?" "A good question," said the captain. Lucian kept smiling at his grandparents. "Gosh, it's good to see you. Gosh, it's good." The captain stood up and slapped his hand on his leg in a casual fashion. "We got to be going. Thank you for the drinks." "You'll be back, of course," said the old people. "For supper tonight?" "We'll try to make it, thanks. There's so much to be done. My men are waiting for me back at the rocket," and he stopped. He looked toward the door, startled. Far away in the sunlight there was a sound of voices, shouting and a great hello. "What's that?" asked Hingston. "We'll soon find out." Captain John Black was out the front door abruptly, running across the green lawn into the street of the Martian town. He stood looking at the rocket. The ports were open, and his crew was streaming out, waving their hands. A crowd of people had gathered. In and through, and among these people, the members of the crew were hurrying, talking, laughing, shaking hands. People did little dances. People swarmed. The rocket lay empty and abandoned. A brass band exploded in the sunlight, flinging off a gay tune from upraised tubas and trumpets. There was a bang of drums and a shrill of fifes. Little girls with golden hair jumped up and down. Little boys shouted hooray. Fat men passed around 10-cent cigars. Town mayor made a speech. Each member of the crew, with a mother on one arm, a father or sister on the other, was spirited off down the street into little cottages or big mansions. "Stop!" cried Captain Black. The doors slammed shut. The heat rose in the clear spring sky. All was silent. The brass band banged off around a corner, leaving the rocket to shine and dazzle alone in the sunlight. "Abandoned," said the captain. "They abandoned the ship, they did. I'll have their skins, by God. They had orders." "Sir," said Lustig, "don't be too hard on them. Those were all old relatives and friends." "That's no excuse." Think how they felt, Captain, seeing familiar faces outside the ship. They had their orders, damn it. "But how would you have felt, Captain?" "I would have obeyed orders." Captain's mouth remained open. Striding along the sidewalk under the Martian sun, tall, smiling, eyes amazingly clear and blue, came a young man of some 26 years. "John," the man called out and broke into a trot. "What?" Captain John Black swayed. "John, you old son of a bitch!" The man ran up and gripped his hand and slapped him on the back. "It's you," said Captain Black. "Of course. Who'd you think it was?" "Edward." The captain appealed now to Lustig and Hingston, holding the stranger's hand. "This is my brother Edward. Ed, meet my men. Lustig, Hingston, my brother." They tugged at each other's hands and arms and then finally embraced. "Ed! John! You're looking fine, Ed, but, Ed, what is this? You haven't changed over the years. You died, I remember, when you were 26 and I was 19. Good God, so many years ago, and here you are, and Lord, what's going on?" "Mom's waiting," said Edward Black, grinning. "Mom? And Dad, too." "Dad?" The captain almost fell as if he'd been hit by a mighty weapon. He walked stiffly and without coordination. "Mom and Dad alive? Where?" "At the old house on Oak Knoll Avenue." "The old house?" Captain stared in delighted amaze. "Did you hear that, Lustig? Hingston?" Hingston was gone. He'd seen his own house down the street and was running for it. Lustig was laughing. "You see, Captain, what happened to everyone on the rocket? They couldn't help themselves." "Yes, yes." The captain shut his eyes. When I open my eyes, you'll be gone." He blinked. "You're still there. God, Ed, you look fine." "Come on, lunch is waiting. I told Mom," Lustig said. "Sir, I'll be with my grandfolks if you need me." "What? Oh, fine, Lustig. Later, then." Edward seized his arm and marched him. "There's the house. Remember it?" "Hell, bet I can beat you to the front porch." They ran. The trees roared over Captain Black's head. The earth roared under his feet. He saw the golden figure of Edward Black pull ahead of him in the amazing dream of reality. He saw the house rush forward, the screen door swing wide. "Beat you!" cried Edward. "I'm an old man," panted the captain, "and you're still young. But then, you always beat me, I remember." In the doorway, Mom, pink, plump, and bright. Behind her, peppery gray, Dad, his pipe in his head. "Mom, Dad!" He ran up the steps like a child to meet them. It was a fine, long afternoon. They finished a late lunch, and they sat in the parlor, and he told them all about his rocket, and they nodded and smiled upon him. And Mother was just the same. Dad bit the end off a cigar, lighted it thoughtfully in his old fashion. It was a big turkey dinner that night, and time flowing on. When the drumsticks were swept clean, they brittled upon the plates. The captain leaned back and exhaled his deep satisfaction. Night was in all the trees and coloring the sky. The lamps were halos of pink light in the gentle house. From all the other houses down the street came sounds of music, pianos playing, doors slamming. Mom put a record on the phonograph, and she and Captain John Black had a dance. She was wearing the same perfume he remembered from the summer when she and Dad had been killed in the train accident. She was very real in his arms as they danced lightly to the music. "It's not every day," she said, "you get a second chance to live." "I'll wake in the morning," said the captain. "I'll be in my rocket, in space, and all this will be gone." "No, don't think like that," she cried softly. "Don't question. God's good to us. Let's be happy." "Sorry, Mom." The record ended in a circular hissing. "You're tired, son," Dad pointed with his pipe. "Your old bedroom's waiting for you, brass bed and all." "But I should report my men in." "Why?" "Why? Well, I don't know. No reason, I guess. No, none at all. They're all eating or in bed. Good night's sleep won't hurt them. Good night, son. Mom kissed his cheek. It's good to have you home. It's good to be home. He left the land of cigar smoke and perfume and books and gentle light and ascended the stairs, talking with Edward. Edward pushed a door open. There was the yellow brass bed, the old football pennants from college, the very musty leather coat which he stroked with muted affection. It's too much, said the captain. I'm numb and I'm tired. Too much has happened today. I feel as if I'd been out in a pounding rain for 48 hours without an umbrella or a coat. I'm soaked to the skin with emotion. Edward slapped wide the snowy linens and flounced the pillows. He slid the window up and let the night-blooming jasmine float in. There was moonlight and the sound of distant dancing and whispering. So this is Mars, said the captain, undressing. This is it. Edward undressed in idle, leisurely moves, drawing his shirt off over his head, revealing golden shoulders and a good muscular neck. The lights were out. They were in bed, side by side, as in the days, how many decades ago. The captain lulled and was nourished by the scent of jasmine, pushing the lace curtains out upon the dark air of the room. Among the trees, upon a lawn, someone had cranked up a portable phonograph and now it was playing softly always. The thought of Marilyn came to his mind. Is Marilyn here? His brother, lying straight out in the moonlight from the window, waited and then said, Yes, she's out of town. She'll be here in the morning. The captain shut his eyes. I want to see Marilyn very much. The room was square and quiet except for their breathing. Good night, Ed. A pause. Good night, John. He lay peacefully, letting his thoughts float. For the first time, the stress of the day was moved aside. He could think logically now. It had all been emotion. The bands playing, the familiar faces. But now, how, he wondered. How was all this made? And why? For what purpose? Out of the goodness of some divine intervention? Was God then really that thoughtful of his children? How? And why? And what for? He considered the various theories advanced in the first heat of the afternoon by Hingston and Lustig. Then all kinds of new theories drop in lazy pebbles down through his mind, turning, throwing out dull flashes of light. Mom, Dad, Edward, Mars, Earth, Mars, Martians. Who had lived here 1,000 years ago on Mars? Martians? Or had this always been the way it was today? Martians. He repeated the word idly, inwardly. He laughed out loud almost. He had the most ridiculous theory quite suddenly. Gave him a kind of chill. There's really nothing to consider, of course. Highly improbable. Silly. Forget it. Ridiculous. But he thought, just suppose, now that there were Martians living on Mars, and they saw our ship coming, and saw us inside our ship and hated us. Suppose now, just for the hell of it, they wanted to destroy us, as invaders, as unwanted ones. They wanted to do it in a very clever way so that we would be taken off guard. Well, what would be the best weapon? What would the best weapon be that a Martian could use against Earthmen with atomic weapons? The answer was interesting. Telepathy, hypnosis, memory, and imagination. Suppose all these houses aren't real at all. This bed not real. Only figments of my own imagination, given substance by telepathy and hypnosis through the Martians, thought Captain John Black. Suppose these houses are really some other shape, a Martian shape. By playing on my desires and wants, these Martians have made this seem like my old hometown, my old house, to lull me out of my suspicions. What better way to fool a man, using his own mother and father as bait? And this town so old, in the year 1956, long before any of my men were born, the year when I was 6 years old, and there were records of Al Jolson, Maxfield Parrish paintings still hanging, and bead curtains, and beautiful Ohio, and turn-of-the-century architecture. What if the Martians took the memories of a town exclusively from my mind? They say childhood memories are the clearest. After they built the town from my mind, they populated it with the most loved people from all the minds of the people on the rocket. I suppose those two people in the next room asleep are not my mother and father at all, but two Martians, incredibly brilliant, with the ability to keep me under this dreaming hypnosis all the time. And that brass band today, what a startlingly wonderful plan it would be. First fool Lustig, then Hingston, then gather a crowd. And all the men in the rocket, seeing mothers, aunts, uncles, sweethearts, dead 10, 20 years ago, naturally disregarding orders, rush out and abandon ship. What more natural? What more unsuspecting? What more simple? Man doesn't ask too many questions when his mother is suddenly brought back to life. He's much too happy. Here we all are tonight, in various houses, in various beds, no weapons to protect us, and the rocket lies in the moonlight, empty. And wouldn't it be horrible and terrifying to discover that all this was part of some great, clever plan by the Martians to divide and conquer us and kill us? Sometime during the night, perhaps, my brother here on this bed will change form, melt, shift, become another thing, a terrible thing, a Martian. It'd be very simple for him just to turn over in bed and put a knife into my heart. In all those other houses down the street, a dozen other brothers or fathers suddenly melting away, taking knives and doing things to the unsuspecting, sleeping men of Earth. His hands were shaking under the covers. His body was cold. Suddenly it was not a theory. Suddenly he was very afraid. He lifted himself in bed and listened. The night was very quiet. The music had stopped. The wind had died. His brother lay sleeping beside him. Carefully he lifted the covers, rolled them back. He slipped from bed and was walking softly across the room when his brother's voice said, "Where are you going?" "What?" His brother's voice was quite cold. I said, "Where do you think you're going?" "For a drink of water." "But you're not thirsty." Yes, I am." "No, you're not." Captain John Black broke and ran across the room. He screamed. He screamed twice. He never reached the door. In the morning, the brass band played a mournful dirge. From every house in the street came little solemn processions, bearing long boxes. Along the sun-filled street, weeping, came the grandmas and mothers and sisters and brothers and uncles and fathers, walking to the churchyard, where there were new holes freshly dug, new tombstones installed. 16 holes in all, and 16 tombstones. The mayor made a little sad speech, his face sometimes looking like the mayor, sometimes looking like something else. Mother and Father Black were there, with Brother Edward, and they cried, the faces melting now from a familiar face into something else. Grandpa and Grandma Lustig were there, weeping, the faces shifting like wax, shimmering as all things shimmer on a hot day. The coffins were lowered. Someone murmured about the unexpected and sudden deaths of 16 fine men during the night. Earth pounded down on the coffin lids. The brass band, playing Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean, marched and slammed back into town, and everyone took the day off.